If you're wanting to start fishing more tournaments, fishing as a co-angler is a great way to get a lot more experience and learn a lot about bass fishing. And today I want to give the co-angler 5 tips that they can use when they're out there on the water, so stay tuned, it's gonna be a good one. This video is brought to you by sportsmansoutfitters.com, and at the very end of this video, I'm actually going to be talking about what I think is one of the best lures that you can master as a co-angler. And you can pick up all that at sportsmansoutfitters.com. And not only that, they're having their cabin fever sale right now. So if you're stuck at home, you want to spend a little money on tackle, click the links down below in the description. You can pick up your favorite lures for some of the best prices. I've actually been fishing tournaments since I was 15 years old, and when I was like 18 and 19, I actually fished a couple years as a co-angler on the Bassmaster Opens. I got to fish with some of the biggest name pros that there are out there, and I learned a ton about fishing and about tournament fishing being a co-angler. And not only that, but I also fished the Bassmaster Opens for 6 years as a boater, where I had co-anglers in my boat and with me at all times. So I've been on both sides. I've been the co-angler, I've been the boater, fishing with a lot of co-anglers. So I really think that these 5 tips will help you to be a lot more successful out there on the water. Tip number 1 for co-anglers is never throw the same lure as your boater. I know that this may seem a little bit off to some people, but what I have seen a lot of times is that co-anglers who are in my boat, the ones that tend to do the best, aren't typically throwing what I'm throwing. And even when I was a co-angler, it was the same way. If the boater that I was fishing with was fishing a jig, I had a lot more success fishing something like a shaky head behind him and not a jig, even if he's up there catching a lot of fish. I've seen it time and time again. If you're throwing something that is different, you're actually gonna have a lot better likelihood of catching fish. And sometimes this means that you have to go to finesse fishing, but not all the time. As a matter of fact, one of my best friends, he fished as a co-angler the same years that I fished as a co-angler. And he actually fished behind a certain professional who was on Major League Fishing. And his professional fisherman was fishing a bluff wall, and he was skipping a Cinco, a 4-inch Cinco up under overhanging trees. And he was catching some fish that way. But my best friend, the co-angler in this situation, instead of going finesse route, he actually went for the power route. And he actually started pitching a jig up to these bluff walls. And he started catching a lot more fish and a lot better quality fish than the pro angler. By the end of the day, that certain pro angler was literally asking him to make jigs for him. So you don't always have to be more finessey than your pro angler. It's just important to do something that is different. In one tournament where I was fishing as the boater on Lake Toho, it was a Bassmaster Open, I was flipping and pitching reeds with a tube. Now my first day co-angler also decided he was going to flip and pitch reeds, and he really did not catch many fish behind me. But on the second day, I had a co-angler that actually decided to pick up a swim bait, a totally different presentation. I was still flipping and pitching. He was throwing that swim bait, and although he didn't catch them better than I did, he actually caught probably the same amount of fish. He was getting the same amount of bites because he was fishing for a fish that was just totally reacting to a different lure. So throwing a different lure is so critical when you're a co-angler fishing behind someone. Now there are a few situations where it is okay to fish the same lure as the boater that you are fishing with. And basically, this is anytime you have a vast amount of cover that you are fishing. For instance, if you are fishing on a large grass flat where bass could be anywhere, and say the boater that you are fishing with is fishing a chatterbait, it's okay for you to fish the exact same chatterbait as long as you are making sure that you are casting it in different areas than he is. This might mean that you're casting on the opposite side of the boat. Or another example is maybe you're fishing around a lot of cypress trees, and there's cypress trees all over the place. There might be certain cypress trees that are a little bit deeper or a little bit shallower that your boater is not hitting, and if you're casting at those, then you're really putting a lure that you know works in a spot that hasn't been touched, and that is also going to help you to catch more fish. Now this actually brings me to my second tip when it comes to fishing as a co-angler, and that is pay attention to every cast that your boater makes. Now, I know when it comes to fishing, we should really concentrate on what we are doing, but something that I found that was super advantageous for me when I was fishing as a co-angler was actually really paying attention to where my boater was casting. The reason that I wanted to pay attention to where he was casting was because that was an area that I absolutely did not want to cast. A lot of us anglers, as we're going down the bank or we're fishing, we kind of look for the same type of cover or cover elements, and we might think that's a good little spot. Maybe it's a shade pocket on the side of a dock, whatever it may be. But if you're paying attention to your boater and he's casting at the same exact type of target, it's really best for you as a co-angler to not even worry about casting in that exact same target. If you're casting at targets that he has not hit, then you are fishing for fresh fish and you're gonna have just as likely as odds of catching a fish as he does. I remember fishing a tournament on Santee Cooper Lake. I was fishing as a co-angler, and the boater that I was fishing with, we were fishing a giant cypress tree area. There were cypress trees all over the place, and he was flipping and pitching just a soft plastic to those trees, and I was watching him constantly to see exactly where he was putting that lure. And what I figured out was that he was typically only making one cast or so at each tree. He would kind of pick out that high percentage area, cast there, and if he didn't catch a bass, he was on to the next tree. So in that case, what I did was I started casting to the opposite side of the same exact trees that he was casting at. So we're coming up to a cypress tree, he pitches on one side, I see where he pitches. I'm not even gonna worry about putting my lure there. I'm gonna pitch my lure to the other side. Now that was the first day of that tournament. On the second day of that tournament, I fished with a guy that was fishing boat docks, and he was fishing them with a chatterbait. And to be honest, this guy was covering these boat docks really, really efficiently. He was making good skips under the boat docks. He was taking his time, and he was catching a lot of fish. But the one thing that he wasn't fishing were the walkways and the bank that was in between those boat docks. So I started not worrying about the actual boat dock itself. I would only cast at the walkways and at the bank. Sometimes on the bank there would be a stump or a little laydown. And I caught a lot of fish behind this guy, targeting areas that he was not even fishing because I was paying attention to where he was casting. That helped me to catch a lot of fish during that tournament, as well as cashing a check in that tournament, which is obviously what we all want to do. I can't tell you how crucial that tip is and how many fish it will help you to catch when you're out there being a co-angler. Moving on to tip number 3, and this is one that I highly suggest that if you can do it, do it. And that is try to get out on the water before tournament day. As a co-angler, one of the nice things is that you don't really have to worry about finding fish. You don't have to worry about going out 3-4 days in advance and trying to figure out the body of water. You can literally just show up on tournament day and start fishing with your boater. But the thing is I saw a humongous advantage, me being a co-angler, getting out on the body of water several days in advance before the tournament day. Now, I did this actually a couple of different ways. One, I actually fished with a boater. I actually fished with my uncle, who was a boater on the opens at the time. I fished as a co-angler, and it really allowed me to get a feel for the water. It also allowed me to get confident in a couple of different lures that I knew were working well on that body of water. Now, the second year I fished as a co-angler, my uncle did not fish as a boater anymore, and I couldn't fish with him prior to the event. But what I did is, me and my best friend, we actually both owned boats at the time, and we took down one of our boats, and we would spend 2 or 3 days out there experiencing this new body of water for the first time. And it really helped us to kind of see the body of water, gain confidence in a couple of lures. And then during the tournament, we already knew kind of what we would be throwing, and we just had to kind of critique it to where our boater was fishing. I really cannot stress to you that point. I really think it is so important that if you can, try to get out on the body of water, even if it's for half a day with somebody, it can really, really help you just to be more comfortable, and so that you're not spending a ton of time in the back of the boat trying to figure out your lure selection. You actually have the lures that you're confident in, and you're just fishing come tournament day. I remember fishing on Lake Wheeler in Alabama, and me and my co-angler friend, we went down there and we fished out of his boat a couple of days before the event, even though we were both co-anglers. We actually figured out that the bass really liked a black and gold flake lure, and we were actually able to use that same lure during the tournament, and it helped us to outfish our boaters on some of those days. It was crazy, and that's an advantage that you can only get if you get on the water before the tournament day. The fourth tip when it comes to being a co-angler is one that I think is extremely important, and I think that it's starting to just get lost in today's culture of everyone kind of being about themselves. The tip is, do not purposefully D your boater. What I mean by D'ing your boater is just like when we were in grade school and you had someone who D'd in line, right? They got in front of you in line. This is the same thing when it comes to being a co-angler. Do not try to fish a piece of cover that you know your boater is going to fish before he does. Do not try to cast up to a laydown or a dock or a tree that you know that he's going to fish. The truth of the matter is that the boater that you are fishing with has paid a tremendous amount of money to fish that tournament, and honestly, he deserves to have the first cast at anything that he is trying to fish. I know that as a co-angler, fishing an event like the Opens can be extremely expensive. I think I was spending $1,000 on one of those tournaments, which is a lot of money. But here's the thing, your boater is probably spending 3 or 4 times that amount. He's probably spending $3,000 to $4,000 in that tournament, and honestly, he really deserves to have the first cast and the first pitch at certain objects that you know he is going to fish. Now, obviously, this means don't try to cast your baits out in front of where he is fishing. But the other thing is just kind of be mindful. If you're going down a row of docks and your boater is fishing each of those docks, you as a co-angler, you can actually cast to some of those docks before he can. But if you know that he's going to be fishing that dock, don't do it. Don't purposefully cast out and try to take advantage of a boat position on your boater. I just think it's a little bit disrespectful. This is something that my uncle really laid into me, and I think that it's really important to do this. But here's the thing, communication is everything when it comes to fishing with a boater. Making sure that you're talking to him, making sure that you're figuring out what you're going to be fishing is so important, because sometimes you might go down a small canal or creek and your boater may not even be planning to fish the other side at all. So in that case, if you're communicating with your boater, you might be able to fish on that other side and he's not going to care, and it's not going to be disrespectful at all. In the very first tournament that I fished as a co-angler on the Opens, this happened to me. I was fishing with Cliff Crochet, and we actually were both fishing on championship day. Cliff Crochet is now a major league fishing professional. We were fishing in Florida, and we were going down kind of a wide canal, but on one side of this canal, it was a natural bank, and that was what he was fishing. He was fishing wood cover and flipping grass on that side. But on the other side of this canal, there was actually a couple of big docks that kind of came out, and they were within cast range for me to cast to. I simply asked Cliff, I said, hey man, do you mind if I cast over at those docks? Because I wanted to make sure he wasn't going to fish those maybe on the way back. And in his Louisiana accent, he actually was like, nah, go ahead, partner, or whatever he said. He basically said, no, go ahead, cast out there. I'm not gonna be fishing those. I started making these bomb casts at these docks, and I actually caught a 3.5 pounder that day, which actually ended up being the big fish between both of us on that day. And he was 100% fine with it because he was never even planning to fish those docks at all. So do not purposefully D your boater, and keep communication open, because there are situations like that you might be able to fish for fresh fish that he's not even planning to hit, and that can really help you to catch a lot more bass in these tournaments. All right guys, tip number 5 when it comes to being a co-angler actually comes down to what I think is one of the best co-angler lures that you can learn and that you can use when you're out there on the water, and that is a drop shot. I cannot express to you how good a drop shot bait is as a co-angler. It is a bait that you can catch fish behind guys, even pitching your bait in some of the similar areas that your boater is. Your boater may be going down some docks, he's flipping a jig, you're fishing that drop shot, and you can get a lot of bites that he's going to miss. Like I talked about earlier, I've seen this on both sides as being a co-angler and being a boater. I remember being a co-angler fishing a drop shot behind anglers, and I was able to catch a lot of fish simply by utilizing that drop shot wherever we went, whether it was clean water, muddy water, current, no matter what, you can fish a drop shot. It's a very versatile lure. Now, on the flip side of things, there have been a few times where I've been spanked by my co-anglers being the boater. And the lure that was most used during those times was a drop shot. I remember fishing on the James River. I was flipping and pitching everything that I came to. The guy behind me, he was fishing a drop shot, and he caught some big fish behind me fishing that drop shot. And that's not the only time I fished up on Lake Oneida. I was fishing a topwater or jerkbait. My co-angler was fishing the drop shot, catching a ton of bass. So learning the drop shot is so important to do if you're going to be a co-angler. I really think it's a lure that you can catch a ton of fish on and do extremely well in tournaments on. Now, speaking of a drop shot, if you want to learn more about fishing a drop shot, you can actually click on this video right here. It really kind of goes over my system when it comes to fishing a drop shot. And don't forget to check out all of your bass fishing needs at sportsmansoutfitters.com. Subscribe to the channel, comment below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.